Hey everybody, it's David J. Murphy, host of Around the Lens. I just want to know before you watch this interview with Derek Hanley about his book, Photos from the Front Lines, I thought I'd let you know that he has graciously offered to give one of our listeners or watchers a copy of this book. So if you'd like to win a copy of Derek Hanley's photo book, Photos from the Front Lines, which you can get at dohp.net, then just leave a comment down on this video. Or if you see this on Facebook or another sort of platform, then leave a comment on that post as well. And I'll be collecting all these comments and everybody who comments, and I will be randomly selecting someone to win the book at the end of February. So you have between now and the end of February to leave a comment on any place that you see a post or notice about this video. I'll collect those up and I'll pick a winner. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Derek Hanley. Hello and welcome to an Around the Lens interview. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. My guest for this episode is Derek O. Hanley, the author of Photos from the Front Lines, A Year on the Streets of Alameda County. Derek, thank you so much for being on the program.
David, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, great to have you here. I read over your book. It's quite the book, I should say, quite beefy, and a lot of content there to digest. But before we get into the book itself, let's talk a little about you, because you have a pretty interesting sort of history and career. So talk to me about yourself, your career, and what brought you into photojournalism.
Yeah, for sure. And I read that you're in the military yourself, so thank you for your service. I'll start off with that. And yeah, I started my career in the military back in 2000. I joined the U.S. Air Force as a paramedic and an instructor, and was stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, working out of the Air Force Level 1 Trauma Center, Wilford Hall, and did that for 4 years. And that was kind of, I guess, the genesis of this project was, back in the early 2000s. I'm sure you remember when cameras were just getting small enough to be able to fit in your pocket before they were on every single, phone in the universe. I was bringing a camera with me out into the field because as a paramedic, you see some intense things and crazy scenes and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So just kind of documenting that a little bit for myself personally, to show my students, things like that. And it was kind of an innocent gathering of imagery. Fast forward a little bit to 2020, I got well, I guess I should back up a little bit. Before that, the reason I moved to California was to help a friend start a video and photography commercial business. So I did that with him for a couple of years, helped build it up, sold off my share, and then started my own company. And so did that for a couple of years, and then 2020 hit, and I got a behind the scenes position with Alameda County EMS doing research and things like that. And, Dave, I worked as a medic in Texas, in the military, and then in New York. Also did a brief tour with the Army National Guard as a medic with them, 42nd Infantry. And then, so doing this research gig, I wanted to get out into the field in the Bay Area because I never worked there. Each kind of area where a medic works is different. There's geography, there's demographics, which makes it a unique thing. So I wanted to see what their job was like, what their challenges were, and was just getting out to the crews, and then, kind of hit myself on the head saying, why don't you bring your camera and see what you can capture? And it was really just to get images of the providers to give back to them so that they can show their friends and their family, hey, look, this is what I do on a daily basis, because most people have no clue what a paramedic does other than, seeing them drive the ambulance around. So it was initially a project to hook the providers up and give them recognition for themselves.
Right.
And then, March 16th, 2020, COVID strikes, Bay Area gets locked down, and then the project took on a completely different tenor.
Absolutely. You mentioned you were in the military doing your medic work, and I'm assuming you're either obviously honorable discharge, but I mean, did you retire or did you just leave the military?
I just left. I did one tour, active duty. My Air Force tour was active duty. I did 4 years, and then I did 5 years in the Guard, and got out right before I moved out to California into the commercial, visual industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever consider staying in to do, photo, video, graphics for the military since you were in and had a passion for that? Or was it always your plan to do your one tour and sort of find other opportunities?
Yeah, I think it was, when I finished my active duty tour, I was a young guy in my 20s. I've been being told what to do since I was 18, and kind of wanted to get back out and be a civilian and live
Yeah.
life on my own terms and things like
Okay.
that. And then I got out of the Army. I think I was just kind of burnt out on it too. You know, it was fulfilling. I learned a lot. I met a lot of good people and
Yeah.
had a lot of fun. But giving up one weekend a month just didn't appeal to me too much anymore.
Yeah.
And looking back at this point, it's reading your bio and the stuff that you've done and do for the military. I'm surprised I hadn't considered that when I was in, because it may have been a little bit more of an enjoyable career track for me. Maybe I might still be in had I done that.
We got a lot of great people in the career field who are lat movers from other career fields who see, of course, our folks out there with cameras and they're thinking, wait a second, I can do that in the military? Yeah, so interesting. Now, I don't quite, how did you move from the medic life to, you said you were helping your friend with his business in audiovisual stuff, but again, what drew you to the creative field, going from medic to like, creative arts is kind of a big switch. So like, was that always something latent in you that you had a desire to do? Like you said, you picked up the camera while you were doing your medic work. So is that something like you always wanted to do, or was it something where you decided, I now want to do this. I want to give and devote my life to, creative work.
Yeah, I kind of was always an amateur photographer, and growing up, Dave, my mom, she's a great photographer. My great uncle who lived next door to us growing up, he was actually in the Marine Corps as he was with the part of the aerial reconnaissance unit in the Pacific Theater in World War II.
Yeah.
So he always had some incredible stories to tell, and always, every time I saw him, he had either a still camera or a video camera, and was showing me how to do stuff and how to capture just the kind of ordinary but beautiful things that are around us at all times.
Right.
So I'm sure that kind of gave me the eye for how to frame shots and how to kind of do the innate technical bits of being a photographer without actually realizing it. And then, like I said, did a little bit of amateur stuff in the fields when I was out there. But moving into the creative field for me was kind of almost like a break from being a medic, because
Okay.
honestly I burnt out on it.
Yeah.
It's
I
such
bet.
such a hard thing to do for people. And if I'm honest, Dave, back in 2000 when I was going through my medic training, we weren't talking about post-traumatic stress or therapy
Right.
or
Yeah.
anything at all for how to
Mm.
process the horror that you're going to see for 12
Sure.
hours a day in and day out for weeks and months and years. And so
Absolutely.
for me, I kind of took all that on and didn't realize how much weight that I kept piling on, and it just got too much. And so I got out of it, and I
Yeah.
was like, I don't really want to do this anymore. I worked as an instructor for the last decade or so, teaching EMTs and things like that. So I
Okay.
kept my toe in it as an
Yeah.
educator, which for me was tolerable.
Right.
But even that got a little bit old, because it's like I'm constantly having to talk about all these traumas and these gunshot wounds and
Yeah.
people dying. It's just it can be such a depressing mode of existence, and
Yeah.
having to talk about that. I mean, even promoting the book and talking about the stories in us can trigger things, and
Sure.
I'm sure.
100%.
So
Yeah. Absolutely.
so yeah, I was just trying to get out of it a little bit, try something different, use my creative energies as best I could, and try to make a go at starting a business. And it ended up working out well. We worked with some great high-profile companies and professional athletes and all stuff like that. And that was fun, and it pays well.
Yeah.
But for me, I want to use my powers for good. I don't
Sure.
want to I'm not trying to make Mark Zuckerberg more money by doing some high dollar gig for Facebook. All that stuff's out there in the Bay Area, and it's so easy to get the work, but it's soulless.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like knowing that there's people out there, like in Photos from the Front Lines, these paramedics are doing this brave, courageous work day in and day out. And who is singing their praises? Who is
Sure.
who's the PR person for the paramedic career field?
Yeah.
There's a kind of a vacuum there, and that's where I think I kind of come in with this stuff. I'd rather promote those who are doing good for humanity and get their stories told and help society honor these folks, who in my mind are severely lacking in that respect.
Well, I think that kind of goes neatly into our next question, which is about your project, right? Because this is a book that is all about documenting our emergency responders and what they're doing out there on a regular basis. So talk to me about the sort of this project itself, the genesis of it, and what is it all about? What's the story here?
Sure. So I think I could sum it up by saying it's basically the arc of the pandemic through the lens of the paramedics who were on the front lines. Each of us has our own story from 2020 and our own experience and hardships and struggles. And, like I said, I started off just innocently enough, shooting photos to give to the paramedics and to use for their own purposes. But after the pandemic struck, it would have been so easy, Dave, to just, wash my hands and say, hey, I'm going to stay home. I'm working from home. It's all good. Y'all
Yeah,
do your thing.
right.
But I felt compelled really to go back out there despite the risk to myself. And, I use military vernacular in the book intentionally to try to conceptually tie these two professions together in people's minds, which is military and medic, because, other than a combat soldier, what other job is someone getting this level of traumatic exposures throughout the course of their lifetime doing it? There is
Sure.
none. There's no comparison. And
Yeah.
so in doing that, it seems like, I should say, after the pandemic struck, there's this risk, and this battlefront, if we can call it that, is unique in my opinion because to me, I wasn't worried about myself getting sick going out in the field. I was worried about getting my wife and our close friends and the people in our bubble, getting them sick and them dying and this and that. So that's
Yeah.
unique to this battlefront is these folks who are out there are not only worried about keeping themselves safe, it's now their families that could be at risk because this stuff can be transmitted asymptomatically. You don't know. And any patient you pick up could potentially be a carrier. I mean, if we can put air quotes around, routine trauma, the things that paramedics normally see, car accidents and cardiac arrests and injured children and, all the horrific stuff. Now we have this ever ballooning weight of uncertainty and risk that these folks are having to deal with. And they're giving them rocks and coconuts to fight. In the book, Photos from the Front Lines, you can see when the pandemic first struck, the supply line wasn't keeping up with the demand for PPE, and so the medics were getting issued, one N95 mask at the start of their shift, and then if they used it for a potential call, they're calling a captain to come to the hospital and on a one-to-one basis exchange another mask. And so it's one thing to go into battle with your full body armor and your helmet and everything like that. It's another thing to go in with just your polyester shirt. And so, these folks were standing on their hind legs, trying to keep the public safe, trying to keep them and their families safe
Yeah.
for months and months. And without this documentation, it would have just been a memory.
Wow. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so you obviously chose Alameda County because you live in Alameda County, right? That's your hometown.
It was. I recently just moved up to the Portland area a couple months ago, but I lived there for about a decade.
Okay. Wow. Great. Have you worked on any book projects before this one, or is this your first one?
I put out a short photo essay book called Behind the Skirmish Line, which is actually probably the little baby brother to this one because, I was going out in the field, I was capturing this stuff. It was really interesting, the appreciation parades that we were seeing in, a couple of months after the pandemic started. I was documenting stuff like that, and then the George Floyd incident happened. And I
Yeah.
got to go out with the tactical EMS team the night of the major protest in downtown Oakland,
Right.
and got some ridiculous shots. I mean, that night there were 7,500 protesters that show up and maybe 200 cops and first responders that were on the line. And there were two federal security officers who were shot a few blocks away at the federal courthouse. I guess the attackers were using the protest as like a smokescreen. And so the tactical medics had to respond to those shootings. And unfortunately, one of the officers who was shot succumbed to his injuries and perished
Yeah.
on the way to the hospital. And that was a hard night for those medics, a hard thing for them to have to deal with, seeing another first responder, perish despite their best efforts.
Yeah.
And so when I got home that night, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. I plugged in my card and was looking at the images I got, and I was just, my mouth was just agape with some of the shots
Yeah.
I got. And I was like, man, I can't let this stuff just sit and rot on my hard drive. Like I need to do something with this and get this out
Sure.
there because this is this is a moment in history that, this perspective most people never get to see.
Right.
And again, the stories of these folks behind the police lines trying to keep everyone safe, the cops, the protesters, the fellow medics, who's telling their story. And so that's why that was the genesis of that book. And then once I kind of understood the publishing process after that point and was continuing to build this body of work over the year, once the mass vaccination sites were being set up and done, and the kind of the fervor of the pandemic was starting to wind down, that's when I started looking back through everything and saying, yeah, I should put this all together into a full project and put it out. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got the project, it's all out and done, right? The book is published. People can go pick it up, probably through your website, or I don't know if it's being sold in stores or whatnot. I'm sure on Amazon and whatnot. But it's a big book, 500 pages. Do you happen to have a physical copy near you that you can show on camera?
So here we
Holy
got.
cow! Let's see the side of that thing.
Yeah, I'll show you the
Oh my
profile.
God.
That's the.
Yeah, that's a big one right there. Ooh.
So
Man,
it's
let's
like
see, let's see the spine. Let me see the other side, the spine with the text. Yeah. Holy cow. So that's a big book, 500 pages.
Basically a ream of paper per per
that?
copy. It's basically a ream of paper per copy.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if that thing fell on your foot, you'd have to get the emergency responders there to take you to the hospital. But what went into your decision to make this book as big as you did? And ultimately, is it everything you wanted? Do you think it's too big? Are there photos you left on the cutting room table? Do you wish you'd make it longer? Kind of what went into that decision making?
It was kind of all those things, actually. There were, I mean, I have thousands of shots from, the times I went out into the field, and a lot of the things, it's kind of easy to cut the low hanging fruit of things that aren't well focused, and I can easily cut through with the technical bits. So this doesn't look good, or it's not lit well, or whatever. But really, I wanted to the ones that are included are the ones that can tell a story, and the ones that humanize the medics, because I think that's kind of what's lacking in people's understanding of what medics do, is the human component, and what these folks have to see and deal with. These things, just like a soldier in the military, you may be a paramedic for 4 years, but I'll tell you what, you can see a lot of horror in 4 years, and you have to carry that until your dying day. And so that's why it's like having these shots, and black and white was also a conceptual thing too, because it harkens back to no one cares about World War I. Why? Because there's no photos or no video showing what was going on, really. Once they started pushing photographers and videographers to the front lines in World War II, and they started sending their images back, and the public got to get a chance to see, like, whoa, this is what these guys have to go through. This is what they have to see and deal with. Like, man, we should thank them for their service. We should, provide for their healthcare and their education. And, to me, it seems like that imagery caused the sea change in public opinion to bring about things like, the VA and, all the things that we do to honor veterans. Even just the phrase, thank you for your service. We hold veterans in a place of honor because of what they have to see and deal with. So why do we not do the same things for the medics, who are the ones keeping us safe on the front lines at home?
Sure. But did this book always, in your vision, end up as was it always envisioned to be a 500-page product, or did it start out smaller and it just grew over time because there was much more story you wanted to tell? Did you try to make a shorter book? What were some of those factors that came into play?
Yeah, I don't think I ever envisioned it being this big when I started the project. I mean, this is a whopper, man. And a lot of stuff was cut out, but there's a lot of stuff I left in intentionally. That may not be the most captivating or the most a big hook for average Joe. But for example, like the appreciation parades. There's lots of shots of the healthcare workers, because it was a mutual appreciation. The first responders were doing parades around the hospitals, so that we could honor the folks in the hospitals who are, keeping us all safe. They were there to honor us. And I have a lot of photos of just the crowd of people waving and giving thumbs up and, showing their support and their honor and their love for the first responders, because there was maybe maybe only a handful of medics. There was a couple of fire trucks. There was, some police cars and things like that. But not many people got to see or experience this gratitude and this outpouring of love and support. And so those sections run a little bit long, maybe some may say, but those sections are really in there for those people who were out there doing it day in and day out and didn't get to receive that gratitude and that love from the public. Because I think that's one of the things that contributes to burnout too in this career field. If you have to seek horrible stuff and this and that, but you're honored for it and you're respected, and society puts you on a pedestal. There's something to cling to on those dark nights of the soul. When you go home and the walls start closing in, and you're having to relive all these things that you've seen and heard and smelled, throughout the course of your shift. Having that status shield of honor in society can be one of those things that reels you in and kind of keeps you from going off the edge. So there's sections in there that run a little long, but that was intentional. I would rather keep those pages in there and make the book a little longer than some might say, for those folks. But like I said, I snipped as much as I could that I thought would still tell the story of each vignette adequately, because it's a comprehensive look at the year, but it's just basically punctuated by these vignettes. And some of the characters in there you get to see throughout the book, and you kind of revisit them and see how they're doing and see them in different emotional states. And I think the black and white kind of helps with that too, because when you strip away the color, it kind of forces you to focus on the emotional state of the subject. And it makes their expressions and things like that a little bit more poignant, have a little bit more gravitas. And it also, in my opinion, seems to make the background almost a character in the story. Because in a lot of the shots, the city of Oakland is in the background, and some of the elements of that kind of give context and give feeling to where these folks work and what the environment is in which they operate. And hopefully gives people who see it a much better understanding and appreciation for what these folks go through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to ask you about the black and white choice a little bit later, but since you mentioned it, I was going to say, like, what was that? What went to that decision-making factor? Because one of the first photos I saw in the book is about showcases blood, right? It showcases some of the blood on the different devices and tools that they're using. And my first thought was thinking, like, man, this image would be so much more dramatic, and it would punctuate and like sit with me that much harder if I could actually see the blood. Because again, that's what they deal with, right? It's the truth of the situation. It's the truth of the subject matter. But for the particular image, you really almost lose the blood because of the color is almost lost in the color of the gurney or whatever it is that their tools are. So again, I was just curious, why you chose black and white, and you made a pretty good argument as to why you did. But did you think perhaps maybe certain shots could have been better told with color, or did you think perhaps maybe mixing color in black and white, or was always going to do this in black and white from the very beginning, and everything's going to be black and white consistent throughout?
It really was my choice to do it black and white from the beginning. As you say, there are lots of entrancing colors and things that can come from these scenes. Blood being one of them. I mean, that's something that captures the eye immediately. It's a visceral reaction when you see real blood on the ground or something like that. So yeah, we do miss some of those kind of more shocking elements that color can provide. But I think the trade-off is worth it with the emotion that the black and white produces. Now, the other thing, Dave, is to produce this book in full color, being 500 pages, would probably be twice the cost of what it is right now. With the premium paper and the premium ink, for a photo book, it's already a pretty pricey item to begin with.
Right.
So I want to try and keep it. It's $74.99 on my website.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's I mean, that's the lowest I could get it with the production costs for something this massive. And so I want to keep it affordable for people like first responders and your kind of average Joe to have this, to be able to own this. And this is like a family heirloom. This is something you can show your kids and say, hey, this is what we survived. This is what this is the time period we went through. And especially the folks who are actually first responders and who did this work. I mean, this is something that, you can have on your coffee table. People can see it, people can flip through, and just doing that, just owning this, just displaying it, is one step towards giving recognition for these folks. That, some people say, hey, what can I do as average Joe to give, to support and give recognition? Well, something like this on your coffee table shows everyone who walks in your house that you honor medics and you are one trying to spread this message and um, help give acknowledgement for what these folks do and their bravery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, you said this was your second book. Are there any other books in the pipeline that we can expect from you in the future?
Well, I have a couple of projects I'm working on right now. One is music related. I did a lot of concert photography in San Francisco when I lived there. So like a kind of compilation of some of the best shots I got from that. But more in line with this, I'm thinking about, I have a project in the works called War Stories, where I'm trying to get with medics, at least locally to begin with. And, any medic who's been working for more than 6 months could have probably a whole list of horror stories that they could tell you off the top of their head. So I'd like to find some of the more poignant ones, some of the ones that really, give you that visceral reaction and kind of communicate the pressure that this job is involved with, man. Because I'll tell you what, I've done a lot of careers and a lot of jobs and this and that in my lifetime. There's nothing that comes even close to the pressure of a crashing patient, unconscious, laying on your stretcher, and it's just you by yourself trying to do all these interventions in the back of a moving vehicle for 30 to 45 minutes until you reach that backup, which is the hospital. I mean, you can't imagine the pressure that one person feels being responsible for all of that. So I would love to get some of these stories, type them up, go out in the field with the medic for a day, shoot some day in the life photos, and have their story in text, with these beautiful, poignant, humanizing photos of this person, so you can read what they had to go through and look them in the face. And then I think that could be a powerful project to, again, help raise more awareness about folks who do this job and the aftermath that they have to deal with.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm quite familiar with what medics go through because I saw Michael Bay's movie Ambulance. I was going to say, like, being someone who's that close to the subject matter, what do you think of the movie, and what maybe your fellow medic friends think of the movie? If you had a chance to talk to them about it.
I haven't watched it actually. I actually usually don't. It's in my queue. I'll check it out at some point. But I wasn't running out to theaters to check it out. And most of those things, like the 911 shows and there's so many of them out there nowadays.
Right.
Most of those are just a vehicle for interpersonal drama with the background of whatever job that they're doing. Is it the hospital? Is it the fire department? Like what are they doing? It doesn't even matter because it's just about the drama between the people at the end of the show. So
yeah.
And they're also usually riddled with medical inaccuracies, which just make the people who actually do the job just roll their eyes and like, did you not consult with any paramedic who's done this job when you were making this film, man? Because I could have told you that that's not what you're supposed to do, and I'm not some highfalutin bigwig or anything. So
right.
I haven't seen it, but I'm guessing I know what it's going to be like, just based on the previews and stuff.
Sure.
So I think those things can cut both ways. I think folks who don't know much about what it's like to be a paramedic might see it and be inspired, and it may raise the public's opinion about folks like that a little bit. But from my experience, again, it seems to be more about the drama and less about the real physical and mental toll that these folks have to endure doing things like this. But if you say it's a good movie, Dave, I'll check it out.
Yeah, I thought it was a riveting multiple hours of action and excitement, and I think it actually paid pretty good respect to the emergency responders.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah, I think the characters, acted very well, and I think it gave them their due diligence. Can I talk to the medical correctness of anything? No, absolutely not. But it was a fun time, and one of his better movies, better than the Transformer movies, in my opinion.
Okay.
But,
okay.
You mentioned music, and I know you're a multi-instrumentalist. What can you play, and how has that musical career been going And, again, are you seeing those crossovers between your musical career and photojournalism?
Yeah, I play a couple different instruments: guitar, bass, percussion, a little bit of keyboards. I've also done, mastering, mixing, the kind of technical production aspect a bit. As far as my career, there really is none.
Yeah.
I did tambourine with a band in the Bay Area here and there. That was just like every once in a while kind of a gig we'd play out. But for me, music is more of a community thing. I like to be able to get together with folks, to play with different instruments, try different styles of music. Just hang out, have a good time, drink beers, play music. To me, that's more of the enjoyable bit of being a musician is the hang. Getting to be with the cats and have a good time. I do like performing too. That's something I've thought about getting into a little bit more now that I'm up here in the Portland area. Honestly, with the move and everything, I've just been trying to keep my head on straight, plus the book launch and whatnot. But the crossover, I think, would be, like I said, the going out to shoot, because I love to go see live music, and there's a lot of bands that I really enjoy, which don't get a lot of national recognition, especially a lot of the more kind of obscure genres like psychedelic rock and things like that, that I really
Right.
like. And there's some great musicians and great songwriters and stuff that no one knows about. So
Sure.
it's again, it's like I don't know if you've ever seen Game of Thrones, but
Yeah.
there's a character Tyrion where he's like, I have a soft spot for bastards and broken things, and
Right.
that's kind of my thing too. Like, yeah, I could be out shooting at the big huge arenas and doing those shows and stuff like that, but for me, it's more interesting to see the more intimate shows and capture that and try and promote and give recognition to these acts that maybe haven't made it, so that they can get, they can put their own media out and start to build a reputation and stuff like that. So a lot of this stuff that I was talking about for the potential book project coming up, is to do just that, is to give these folks something that they can, you know, give to their fans, or, use to promote. And, if I can get a bunch of bands on this thing, um, that then is another, as an heirloom for them, and a product for them that they can then sell through their website and use to make money and further their image and stuff like that. So um, I feel like I actually don't really consider myself a photojournalist. I don't really even consider myself a photographer most of the time. I just take pictures, and sometimes they come out cool and I do nice things with them. Um, so to me, it's more like I shoot what I have access to. If I have access to paramedics, boom, I'm gonna bring my camera. I'm gonna capture what I can and see what I can do with it. If I have access to these indie rock groups who don't have, they're not playing these big arenas, cool. I'm gonna go and shoot that, and I'm gonna see what I can do with it. So um, I've gotten to the point where maybe my bank account may not agree with my decisions,
Yeah.
but to me, being an artist is less about making money and more about making art and promoting things that deserve to be promoted. So that seems to be where my camera has been, is things that I enjoy, things that I want to promote, and things that I think deserve more attention.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the point of photojournalism because, yeah, in reading your book, obviously you make it quite clear, both in our talking and also at the beginning of the book, that this isn't sort of a impartial observer's view of the medic lifestyle. You are a cheerleader and you are showing obvious bias towards medics because you want to highlight them. If anything, I would more classify you as a corporate photographer because it's sort of like you're working for the medic industry, so to speak, or this particular entity to help promote them and highlight them, which is fine. That's what you do. But obviously, yeah, calling you a photojournalist then would be a misnomer because you're not an impartial observer. You're obviously for the agency, which I was going to ask you about. So I would say you're more, like you said, a photographer who happens to know how to tell a story, or a photographer who uses photos to tell stories, which is fine. You can be that, and you can still, tell a wonderful story, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, I'm a photojournalist first and foremost, and I come from things from that perspective. So, being that you were taking the stance that you want to honor and highlight the role of medics in our society, does that mean then that if you had seen the medics doing something untoward, or inappropriate, right? Would you shine a light on that, or would you voluntarily sort of not highlight that because again, you have a bias towards highlighting and promoting positive images of the medic?
Yeah, I would say there were some instances where I withheld taking photos because it may have shown an unfavorable light on the situation, or if someone would have saw this photo with no context, it could cause fallout or make people think certain things.
Sure.
So I totally, in the moment and in the editing room, purposely selected things that would shine a positive light. Um, that being said, I think I tried to let the photos speak for themselves. I tried to minimize captioning to only really give context when I thought it was needed, and try to let the photos speak for themselves. Um, and yeah, there's as the marketing person for for the paramedic field, you're exactly right. I bring my commercial skills to this subject matter. And one of the kind of essence of being in commercial photography is to make something look badass. So that was kind of the eye and the lens that I was trying to capture with these folks, to, like you said, kind of exalt them and make that kind of hero shot stick out in people's minds and be visually and emotionally impactful. So you're exactly right. there's lots of editing, there's lots of sculpting. So this is not an impartial work by any means. But
Right.
I think with that being said up front, so that people understand what they're looking at, I think it allows folks to get that deeper dive that they wouldn't get into the subject matter anywhere else.
Right. No, if anything, I mean, this is more of like a medic fan book versus necessarily like again a gritty look at the world of medics. Although you do show some grittiness and some real worldness in there to the extent that you're able, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I think people should go into this book knowing that, again, you're not a photojournalist. You're just someone who uses their camera to tell stories. And, as long as they understand that, then I think that can definitely heighten their ability to appreciate what they're going into. One of the things I noted in the book that I saw multiple times is that you didn't use people's last names. Why?
I used it a couple times for the folks who are in command positions, mostly because these folks are public servants. They're out there in the field a lot, and with the access that people have to information and being able to look people up and things like that, I wanted to try to protect the privacy of the medics as best I could, by not revealing their last name. Now, obviously, people could do research and figure out who they are and that type of a thing if they wanted to. But the other reason too is I think it helps to humanize. When you go into the book and you see Mike, or you see Zach. For some reason, having a last name just seemed to detract from the human. For me, as the person who created it, it seemed like just knowing their first name kind of is a little bit more personal level than first and last name and this type of a thing. The folks who are in command position, they're obviously pretty public figures in the community, so trying to conceal their last name would have been pointless. But yeah, for me, it was just more of a humanizing element to try and humanize the folks even further if I could.
Was this something that was coming from them, like their desire to have anonymity, or was it just something you decided based on your own interpretation of how the images in the book would be perceived? Because again, it is a positive book, right? You're not disparaging them. You're not saying like, oh, intern Joan was a drug dealer on the side. It's all positive. So I'm just, again, were they concerned about their last name being in print? Because obviously they gave you unlimited access pretty much to themselves for this book. Did any one of them have any issues with any of the photos being published? Did you run the book by them to make sure they were okay with their images being published before you published it? What level of scrutiny did you allow them to have over your own work?
Yeah. So when I was in the field, first of all, I'd be talking to the folks who I was getting shots of, explaining the project, kind of getting them on board from the get-go. So that way they knew I wasn't there. And that was the other thing too, Dave, is that being a fellow paramedic, being someone who served almost a decade as a combat medic, I think that helped to drop people's guard when I was around. I think if I was just a journalist or some geek off the street with a camera, they probably would have been a little bit more standoffish. And I think that kind of helped to get some of the intimate shots that you see in photos from the front lines. Now, each person who I featured in there, who has their name and everything, agree. They signed obviously a photo release, explained the project to them, sent them the shots that I'd be using, things like that. If they wanted to see their segment in the book, I would send that over too. So I gave the subjects unlimited scrutiny for whatever they would like regarding the book. Most of the folks, I think, having talked to me and seen some of my shots and whatnot, I think they kind of trusted me to tell a good story on their behalf. Because most folks didn't even want to know, what shots I was using. Any shots I got of the providers I sent to them, so that they could, again, throughout this whole thing, they could use for their own personal, stuff for their family and whatnot.
Sure.
So they got to see everything. Some were involved in the process more than others. Most of them are just, I'd connect with them, they would sign the thing, and I would show them, and we go from there. But no, there wasn't really any big outcry about, I don't want my last name being featured in here or anything like that from them.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, just because there was, almost 90 something medics that I feature, I just wanted to keep it simple and try and keep it relatable.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned something I think is important, is that getting buy-in from your subject. It's very important, no matter, whether or not you're, again, coming in there with a bias to cover them favorably, or if you're just coming in to do a story. You want to make sure, because ultimately they can say, no, we don't want you around, and you have very little say in terms of being able to get that inside access, right? So there has to be a degree of necessarily friendliness or cordiality between you yourself and the subject in order for them to essentially approve your access, right? All of us, every story, every project lives or dies by access. And so if you don't have access, it really limits your ability to tell the story. Now, theoretically, let's say I was going to do a story on the paramedics, and they're like, we don't want this goofball in our building, or we don't want him in our trucks. Well, I can still go to where paramedics go and document you outside in the open. When you're outside in the open, there's no you're completely open to the public, just like any, again, news photojournalist would go out to a scene or something and document paramedics working on a victim or whatnot. I could do something like that and cover the paramedics, that side of the story, very easily. You don't necessarily need the inside access to cover the whole thing, but obviously you were trying to tell a more intimate portrait of who these people were, not just the job they did, which is totally understandable. You mentioned in your book that you made cookies for your subjects. Was this a way to put yourself in their good graces? Like, did you come to the sort of their house, so to speak, with the cookies, be like, hey guys, how you doing? My name's Derek, and I got some cookies. Maybe I could document you guys. Is that cool? How did that work?
The cookies came later. I would usually use my charming personality and my background to win the folks over. Sure. And then once we established a rapport and we're kind of, maybe going on a call or two, then I can pull out the cookies out of the bag and drop that on them and grease the wheels a little bit. It was to grease the wheels, but having been a medic, when you're out there on the streets for 12 hours straight, man, just having something homemade can just make your day. You're so used to eating McDonald's and Starbucks and whatever you can pick up in 5 minutes between calls. And so to have a home baked thing put in your lap, man, the smiles that got from people was more than any of my charms could have possibly elicited. The other interesting facet was my wife was in pastry chef school throughout a lot of 2020. So she would be making these beautiful gourmet cupcakes and all this other stuff, and she'd be the one pushing, like, hey, bring them to the station, give them to the medics, because she knows what a hard job this is, and what a tough career it is, and being on the streets and stuff. So that was her kind of gift to the providers in the field, was her gift of gourmet baking and things. So any chance we
Okay.
could, we try to do that. And we actually on Christmas 2020, yeah, we made enough cookies, bars, brownies, cupcakes to feed the entire workforce that was
Wow.
on Christmas, and we brought them to the station and that type of thing. I didn't document that, and I didn't put that in the book and that type of a thing, because I think sometimes when you do something good, it should just be for the good. It shouldn't be for self promotion or for things like that. Um, so that was kind of her gift and our gift together to the medics to kind of cap off their hard year that they had to face. And it feels good to give, and it feels good to see smiles on people's faces who ordinarily are kind of gruff and kind of crusty at times.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, let's talk about covering patients because obviously that's always very tricky, especially with HIPAA concerns.
Hmm.
And you took, I would say, extraordinary, levels of um, caution when you were taking photos of the patients. And there's no faces, and you barely see the patient in almost any of the photos. Probably going, well above and beyond what you were probably required to not cover with regard to HIPAA. But, again, how did you navigate around that to, again, try to tell a story while also respecting patients' privacy?
Yeah, I really, there's HIPAA and there's laws and things like that. But as a um, as an artist, and if I can call myself a journalist of sorts, as a journalist, I wanted to have some integrity and not exploit the situations in which I had access to. So majority of the time, when you do see parts of a patient or things like that, if they were conscious and able, I would talk to them. I would explain to them what I was doing, and I would get verbal consent from them,
Oh,
at the
okay.
time. Yeah, and a lot of
Yeah.
times they were cool because I was like, hey, you know what? I'm not gonna show your face. I'm just trying to get shots of the medics while they're working with you. Is that cool? And they'd be like, yeah, totally. Like, no worries. So,
Right.
um, anytime I could, I did that. There's a lot of things that took place in public places where expectation of privacy is zero. But
Yeah.
I still wanted to protect because that's the one thing as a medic too. We're there to protect our patients' lives, but also their dignity.
Sure.
Because when you're experiencing an emergency, it's extremely sensitive and compromising position when you're getting stripped with trauma shears, when you're laying in the road or something like that. Like, not much dignity involved in that
Sure.
procedure. So just like I'm trying to protect my subjects, I want to protect the patients who are involved. And as you said, anything that even came close to being questionable got cut in the editing room.
Right.
Because I didn't, I don't want to deal with any sort of legal headaches, but like I said, I want to
Sure.
protect those patients and make sure that no one has a bad taste in their mouth regarding this project.
Yeah.
Because that's something I wanted to avoid. I don't want people to have anything festering or being upset about anything I did, because that's not the point
Right.
of the project. The point is not to exploit and have all this stuff out there. The point is to humanize these medics and these folks who are doing this stuff. So
Yeah.
I think I did the best I could, and I appreciate your take on it as well, because it's kind of hard to tell when you're the only person who's looking at these photos and making these decisions. What do they think? So to hear an expert photojournalist like you, your opinion is great to hear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, I've photographed in sensitive areas, especially like hospitals and stuff. Like shooting in a hospital is just don't even try it. I mean, it's so many. I mean, you can do it, right? There was ways to do it, but it's just a lot of red tape you have to get through, even photograph a hospital. So I would imagine probably a little bit less red tape dealing with the medics. Like, I mean, obviously you gain their trust, so ultimately you're going to do whatever you're going to do, and they're going to be like, okay, well, we're just going to focus on our mission of curing people. You just do what you're going to do. But I'm curious though. I mean, if you actually had you talked to the patients and they gave their consent, I mean, would any of them be like, yeah, sure, show my face, I don't care? Were any of them like that? And would you have done that? Because I think, again, you do, showcase their work, but it's so limited, right? In terms of what you show. I mean, you're showing like
Hmm.
maybe a hand or maybe like the very barest of a silhouette of a person, on a gurney. There's a lot of, I think, what medics do that's missing because of obviously that restriction or limitation. And I think you could have probably gone a little bit further in terms of showcasing that. And even if it, were something where you did get a face in there, but it was a especially dramatic image. I mean, I would even consider blurring out the face if that was the case, right? I mean, there's ways to get around that. So I was just curious, again, from my perspective, doing this professionally, I think you could have gone a little bit further in terms of, again, showcasing what they're doing to really give people that full picture, because a lot of the photographs are, before or after the event, and you see an empty gurney, right? Or you see, them, palling around afterwards, right? But
Hmm.
it's like that truth to, you know, the fundamental of what they're doing. You only get, I think, you don't get as much of a glimpse of that as, like, you really could have. And so that was just curious about that. And again, I'm not going to necessarily hold it against you for being extra cautious, because, like you said, you definitely don't want somebody suing you for using their likeness in an unauthorized form. But again, it's never an easy thing to deal with. And again, I'm just curious. So did you kind of shoot it a little bit more looser on the day and then decide in your edit to kind of cut down to the more restrictive take based
Definitely.
on?
And yeah, and I think what you're saying is actually made me realize something, and be able to put it in words, as the focus of this is so narrow. There's lots of things, like with the some of the accents and stuff. There were more those dramatic shots that I could have thrown in and things like that. But the other thing too is I didn't want to intrude on the relationship between the medic and the patient. Because I tried to be as unobtrusive to the process as possible.
Sure.
Um, because they're doing the real work, and
Hmm.
you can easily get in the way as a photographer and throw off the momentum of the conversation or the rapport, or something I do could throw off the trust that the patient has in the crew.
Sure.
So I'm wearing a polo shirt that says I'm with these guys. And so if I'm doing something dumb, or I'm in the person's face, getting a bunch of photos, how's that going to throw off the dynamic of the call, and that type of a
Sure.
thing. So in the moment, I tried to shoot it intentionally, as respectfully as I could, for the folks who were there. And like I said, try to involve them as best I could. But um, then in the cutting room, yeah, anything that was even close to being questionable, I got out of there. I worked with
Right.
a lawyer to help
Oh,
review
good.
some of
That's
these
smart.
things. Yeah, because like you said, HIPAA can be so crazy with some of these things.
Yeah,
And so anything that was questionable, she was like, get rid of it. Like, don't
of
don't even
course.
waste it, man, because it's not worth the headache to try and
Yeah.
deal with it. And yeah, I did miss out on some of those nice shots of the nice lady looking over, when someone's has the arm on their shoulder, and they're kind of connecting. We do miss some
Yeah.
of those moments, but again, the focus really was so narrow on the providers, that I wanted to get more of what they were looking at, what they were seeing, what their mental state was. It really was the focus on them. So you're absolutely right. I could have been a little bit more bold. Maybe we would have gotten a little more things. There were some things that I could have blurred too, but one of my things was I didn't want to have any blur. I just wanted to
Okay.
use full clean images that told the story and didn't infringe on anyone's modesty or what have you. Um,
Sure.
yeah, so that was my kind of decision making process for that.
Okay. Now, obviously you shot this during the height of COVID, or COVID happened when you were shooting this. Talk to me a little bit about that. What kind of precautions did you take? Obviously, you talk about how at first there's sort of like this: do we wear masks? Don't we wear masks? And then there's, of course, the limitation on masks and whatnot. Did you find any of your subjects not taking COVID seriously at the beginning and sort of changing their minds over time? Um, and what did you do to protect yourself?
Yeah, so initially, like I was saying, there's a PPE shortage. The beginning of the book, it starts out with me embedding with the crews themselves, and then once the pandemic struck, the supply line couldn't keep up with the demand for PPE. So, if I was going to be out on an ambulance with my camera, I'm going to be burning up a third mask that could be used for someone in the workforce who is actually, rendering patient care and, doing what they needed to do to help save lives. So to me, I didn't really want to justify burning up whole extra set of PPE per call, per shift, per shift, in the height of this thing. So at that point, I pivoted to going out in the field with the supervisors and the captains, the ones who drive around in the SUVs, and kind of get to those serious calls, and we can see a more kind of global perspective of what's happening in the county because we're mobile and I can get to see multiple incidents, throughout the course of a shift and things like that. For me, my main thing when I was out there was just to keep my mask on. One of the things that was interesting that I found was the kind of kickback on mask wearing that the medics did. It's almost like I can almost equate it to, when you're out doing a military exercise and you have your body armor and you have your Kevlar and you have your pack and you have all this stuff and you're humping it around all day. When you get back to the barracks, you're not going to keep all that stuff on. The first thing you do is shed all that stuff so you can go, and breathe again.
Right.
So while I would be wearing my mask pretty much the whole day when I was around anyone or at the station or out in the field, a lot of the paramedics, when they got back to the station, they would lose the mask and they'd just be hanging out and things like that. And
sure,
it almost seemed like a pushback, from being forced to have to do something and forced to wear this thing for, when you're out there on calls and stuff like that. It's like, I don't want to wear this dumb thing when I'm back, trying to relax at the station. So they played it a little bit more loose than I did. Again, this is all pre-vaccine.
Sure.
But, obviously, super heightened awareness of everything that I'm touching, everywhere that I'm sitting. I would often be wiping down my camera body, 10, 12 times, in a day, every time there was a patient contact or we were out in someone's home or maybe I touched something that could have been contaminated. So much cross-contamination can happen in these chaotic scenes. So yeah, it's super, super high decontamination. I would usually, obviously strip all my clothes off at the door, go in and take a shower and stuff, throw that stuff straight in the laundry. Because again, I was more concerned about bringing this home and infecting those closest to me. So I tried to take precautions as best I could. I wasn't the most cautious person, but I also wasn't the most lax. And it ended up working out. It was until after we got the vaccines and whatnot that I got COVID, I think in mid 2021. So my precautions worked. It seemed to work out okay. There was one, the most intense, I think, was the vignette where I go into the nursing home with the paramedics, because I'm sure you remember early in the pandemic, the virus was burning through nursing homes, and that was the chief source of transmission and things like that were causing all these infections. So at one point, these nursing homes, every single member of the staff got sick with the bug and couldn't come into work. They had to isolate and quarantine. So the county was basically begging the EMS service for paramedics to come and staff these nursing homes where every single person had gotten wiped out. I mean, just imagine the bravery of these guys and gals who have been doing this thing. This is months into the pandemic now. We still don't know hardly anything of what's happening. We still don't know much about how it's transmitted. Still don't have much protection. These guys have been standing on their hind legs for the last 2 or 3 months dealing with all this, and then raised their hand and said, yes, I will walk into this unit where every single patient that I'm going to be dealing with and treating is sick with COVID, and so much so that the entire staff is wiped out, and that's why I'm here. So, man, just talking about it almost brings me to tears. With
pre-vaccine.
That's crazy.
I
mean, man, if you have a better example of service before self, I'd love to hear it.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And obviously, you don't have a traditional photography background. Did you get any sort of photo training whatsoever, or have you always just been self-trained or self-taught?
Most of it's self-taught. I took a couple, documentary film kind of theory classes, a couple like video editing things, most of which I already kind of knew. But yeah, everything, all my photography skills have been self-taught. And I think, to me, I kind of appreciate that because I kind of learned my own style on my own. As opposed to being kind of indoctrinated with someone's particular style or method of doing things. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I would have benefited from someone over my shoulder telling me what looks better or what doesn't or things like that. I don't know. But that's that's how I got here. I thought about taking certificate classes and whatnot, but again, I'm not trying to be the best photographer, in the universe. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to use the camera to tell stories of things that I
sure.
need to be told. So I think I like my style. I like how it's evolved over the years, and I think it does well for photos from the front lines to tell this particular story.
Yeah. I know a bunch of great photojournalist photographers who are self-taught, but I think what makes us better as photographers going forward, though, is having like good mentorship and having good, people to give us feedback. And I'm just curious, do you have those type of people around you, any sort of circle of friends who are also photographers who help give you that feedback? Was there anyone on this book who, looked at your work and helped guide you in terms of deciding maybe which photos to use, which not to use, or maybe crops or whatnot? Did anyone kind of give you that sort of feedback?
A few folks did. Some of the folks who I shot, some of the subjects, had some feedback for me and things like that. But overall, no. Um, this whole project has just been a labor of love. Me toiling away, in my office late at night to put this stuff together and to make these decisions. Um, which means it's all on me. Any feedback or any critique you have of the book is going to fall squarely on my shoulders because it was me who put it there and made the decision, who was in charge of the editing and everything. So
Sure.
I
Yeah,
take full
absolutely.
responsibility for the content in the book. But I would like that actually. That's something that I've been thinking about not only in my photography but for my business as well. Talk to someone who has taken that next step, or made that big that scaling that I would like to do, to get some feedback as far as how I could do that more efficiently, because I might be able to get to that point, but it may take me 10 times longer trying all the different options until I find the one that actually works, where they can say, no, 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 never mind those 10. Try this one because this is the
Right.
one that's going to
Yeah.
be the most successful for you. So um, I think when I was younger, I was more headstrong. I was like, I know what I'm doing. I can figure it all out on my own, and
Sure.
I don't
Of
need anyone's
course.
help. But now that I'm rounding 41, um, I'm learning that I don't know it all, and there's folks out there who I'm sure I would love to get some input and get some help with, and I think that's probably going to be my next step in the year to come.
You're another fellow 41-year-old. So class of 99, save the best for last, right?
2000.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry for your loss.
Close
But
enough, though. Close enough.
anyways, yeah, no, a mentorship and having feedback is extremely important. It's what I tell anyone who's doing this business is that, I've only ever grown because I've gotten people who were very critical of my work and basically, like they do in the Marine Corps, they tore me down so they could build me back up again, right? And so I tell anybody, in any career field really is to seek mentorship, right? In my professional life, in the military, we always push seeking and finding mentors who can help guide you. Because again, it's like you can know what you want to do, you can be very proficient at it, but if you don't have that sort of outside viewpoint or that sounding board, you're lacking. You're essentially working double hard, right? Because you have that person who can help give you that perspective that you can't get yourself. You literally can't have the outsider perspective because you're inside your own head, right? So it's very difficult to get that. So yeah, always seek that out. Always look for that. Find groups. Find folks who can give you honest feedback, right? Because if you're just showing your work to friends or family or
Oh, it
Facebook
looks
group,
great. Oh, it's
exactly,
beautiful.
they're never going to give you
Yeah.
honest, critical feedback, and that's what you really need to succeed and also grow in this career field. So, talk to me about the kind of cameras and lenses that you use to shoot this.
It was all Canon 5D Mark II, um,
Okay,
24 to 70 and 70 to 200. Keep it guerrilla style. I wanted to
right,
move light. I wanted to be fast and agile.
sure,
And I'm not a huge gear guy. Some
right,
people have, a closet full of all the rad lenses and gear and, everything like that. And that's beautiful. But to me, it's some people can have all the gear and no idea, as they say. I like
yeah,
to try to use the least expensive, the least common denominator that I can to capture the quality image that I'm looking for.
sure,
Now, there may have been, maybe if I had a more expensive camera and, Zeiss glass and, all this other beautiful things. Maybe it could have pumped the production value up somewhat, but I like the dirty. I like the nitty gritty, the guerrilla run and gun. That's kind of my style. And I think you really couldn't do much more than that, given the time constraints and the space constraints. You can't bring a tripod in the back of an ambulance
of
trying to do any of that stuff. So
I like to bring my 8x10,
yeah.
with the powder.
Yeah.
To be like, okay, hold still now.
As we're bouncing down the road in the back of the ambulance. Yeah. So the constraints limited me on the gear, but that's what I would prefer to roll with anyway.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, obviously you probably had a limited gear set, but considering you had the 24 to 70 and you said the 7200, right? Those are your two primary lenses. Did you consider any other lenses? Only because I noticed a lot of your shots are from like inside the back of the ambulance, and that's a very tight space. And I think you would have probably been helped out a little bit if you had maybe a wide angle lens back there, I'd imagine. So I was just curious, was that something that crossed your mind? Did you ever think like, oh, maybe I should borrow this lens? Or was there any interest in using any specialty lenses, even like a 50 millimeter or something, like 1.4 to try and get extra shallow depth of field? Or was it always just those two lenses in that camera, no flash, no nothing else?
Yeah, I realized the limitations of long lenses very quickly as when trying to capture images in the back, because it's so space confined in there, that you do need that wide lens. And I think I did try bringing out a 50 at one point to see what it would capture, but because the scenes are so dynamic, I think the zoom is much more effective because maybe I'm so far back I need to come in a little bit. It helped me to be able to frame things, I think, a little bit better than a fixed camera would. Now, that being said, I thought, maybe a wider angle could give you a little bit more perspective when you're in the back, but then it's another lens. And it's just like, if I'm already juggling with two that I'm trying to keep on me while bouncing around and trying not to get in the way, like a third one was just too much for me to even want to deal with. I figured with these two, I can cover 95% of what I need and still have it come out looking good.
Okay. I noticed on some of your title cards, you'd use month and year, and on a few you use month, day, and year. What went into the determination of how you dated your sections?
I think overall it's just trying to give folks a sense of place of where we were in this historic year. Most people can think back to what they were doing in March of 2020 because that's when, things started happening, or, in May, this is when the protests were and things like that. Now, there were certain events which I was at, like the George Floyd protest in downtown Oakland, where that whole vignette is on about this particular night, this type of a thing. So some of the things I wanted to make it more poignant that I was highlighting this particular date, whereas the rest of them would just kind of give people kind of an overall sense of where we were in this arc of the story, because it covers the year from 2020 to 2021. So I think just kind of giving people a little bit more of where they can place themselves at this point in time, where we are in the book.
Okay. I'm going to bring up a photo here that I just want to get your opinion on. It's on page 25 of your book. I'll share my screen. We'll see if this actually shows up to the viewers as well. But it's this picture here. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a picture of the sign entrance, ambulance entrance. What was your sort of methodology here to choose this particular sign photo to include, in your book?
I think for this, it's to give a sense of place for the paramedics. It doesn't really matter which hospital you transport your patient to. There's going to be a sign like this that shows you where the ambulances are supposed to go and their place. And, the ambulance bay, as we call it, is kind of a safe space for paramedics, because you're rushing, you're trying to save the person's life, you're doing all these interventions in the back of the ambulance, you finally get to the hospital, cool, you hand them over to the docs, you give your report, and you come back and now you can take a breath. Now you can start to cool down, wind down, process what you saw, get a drink of water, get a bite to eat. You have 20 or 30 minutes after a call before you're expected to be back out in the streets again, where you're able to have just a few minutes to yourself to collect your thoughts and get the ambulance back together. And so the ambulance bay is kind of a sacred space for paramedics. And what usually illustrates where this space is this sign for ambulance entrance. So
Right.
it was kind of just any paramedic who opens that page and sees that is probably going to smile because they can think of every hospital they've been to, and
Sure.
every ambulance
It's a
bay
commonality.
every ambulance bay that they've spent time in, and had to process whatever horrible thing that they just had to deal with, and gives them a sense of kind of grounding, I think, when they see that.
Yeah. Now, I noticed in many of your photo vignettes, you have, you're following the team as they do their business, and then they get to the hospital, and you get them entering the hospital, and then that's the end of it, so to speak, for that patient. Did you ever think about following them into the hospital, or did you know you'd get immediately shut down as soon as you did?
I did. One of the times I got immediately shut down. It was one of the first sequences too that I was out with my camera, because I was like, well, I'm not showing any of the hospital staff. I'm not showing the patient. I'm just shooting the providers. But the hospital staff freaked. They're like, what are you doing? Like, you can't take pictures in here, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, sorry, man. I'm just documenting the crews, like not trying to do anything to the hospital. So
Right.
I got lit up once, and that kind of heightened my alert meter for
Sure.
not wanting to do too much there. The shots I do get after the calls are probably going to be in the ambulance bay, where the medics are doing their documentation or getting something to eat, or trying to relax for a second. And also too, I want to give these guys and gals a chance to relax too. Like having a camera in your face can be stressful. And so they just had to go through this call, like let them wind down, let them do their own whatever ritual it is or thing that they need to do to decompress, to be able to focus on the next patient, and take a break myself. I'm having to witness all this stuff, even though I'm not, responsible for patient care. I'm still witnessing this trauma, and can kind of get that secondary effects from seeing this stuff. And man, I've been doing this work a long time. I talk about it, every day to students and things like that. But even after 20 years, man, this stuff still gets to me. Even like doing the promotions for this book can be triggering for me too. Like telling some of these stories and talking about the gunshots and after I get off some of these calls, man, I have to take some time to myself just to like allow that stuff to dissipate, because you carry this stuff forever. And I think that's one of the things that I've tried to drive home when I'm doing these podcasts and things, is that these folks carry this stuff forever. It's never going to go away. It's burnt on that DVD, and every day is probably going to be a struggle for these folks just to get fucking out of. Excuse me, can I swear? I'm not supposed to.
You already did. I'm not.
All right. It's out of the bag. It's out of the bag. Sorry. But I feel strongly, which is why that came up. So they carry this stuff forever. It's a struggle to get out of bed, just to get out of bed. And it's amazing to me that some of these folks who do this for 20 or 30 years can still lace up their boots, and put on the uniform and walk through the door and hop on their ambulance and go back out there, because it is so hard.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously being around, you're observing, right? You're getting sort of the secondary, tertiary experience of witnessing it just because you're there and present. Did any of your prior training ever come up when you were watching them act and be like, wait a second, maybe you should, have you thought about maybe tying off the clavicle here? Hey guys, what if you did 4 pushes instead of 3 pushes on that, resuscitate that guy? I'm just putting some guys out there. Does that ever like come into your head, or you're like, nah, I should probably just keep my opinions to myself?
Pretty much that's what came up. But David, there's actually a critical patient that we responded to in Oakland that I have no images of, because I was actually having to help render aid to this person, because they were crashing.
Man.
And so I had to, I had my Black Rapid strap, so I just kind of tucked my camera behind my back and was, getting in the mix to help out. I mean, I'll tell you what, if you're relying on me to save your life at this point, like,
Mhm.
so I was more of a supplement to the folks who are actually, doing this stuff every day. But there were cases like that. But most of the time, yeah, I keep my trap shut. It's almost, it's a sacred area, the back of an ambulance. That's that paramedic's box.
Sure.
I'm not going to be, obviously, if there's something, a mistake or something, yeah, I'd point it out. But how they relate to their patient, how they render their care, when they're in their box, I'm not going to say anything to, because that's a sacred space. It's almost
Right.
like, if you have family members, when you're dealing with a patient, the family members, they could either be super helpful or super not helpful. I'll give you the case of a pediatric patient. If the parents are there and they're calm and they're keeping the kid calm and they're showing them the teddy bear and they're helping to facilitate the process, yeah, I'll invite the parent to come into the ambulance and ride along, things like that. But there are cases where the parent's behavior is totally spinning the call out of control, and it's making the child's condition worse, and it's making them more upset. And there are cases where I've had to deny folks who are family members from riding in the back with me because it's going to impact negatively upon this person's care. Hard thing to do, but that's my box, and no one's going to tell me what to do or who can come into my box, because my number one focus is taking care of this patient who's before me. So I respect medics and what they're doing. I've had to render care, and there were cases too. We talked about this earlier, but there was a shot where we showed up to the gunshot wound in Oakland, and I got a couple of shots of a blood trail going into the apartment. And at that point, once we reached the apartment and I saw what was happening, I stopped taking photos, because there was no way for me to cover this without compromising the patient's dignity. There were family members who were there, because they're, the person who was shot went into cardiac arrest by the time we got there, and the fire department was doing CPR. The family was there; they were screaming and crying, and that's one of the things that is going to haunt me from this whole experience, is hearing that wife calling out her husband's name and telling him to wake up, when clearly it wasn't going to happen. And you see it's still affecting me now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it affects me. There were times I had to lend a hand, and there were times that, while it would have been super compelling and interesting to see, I opted not to take photos just because of, I didn't think it was appropriate.
Yeah. No, sometimes you have to do that. When I've known, plenty of folks who are in the field and, on front lines, war zones, whatnot. And it's like, when do I put down the camera and pick up the gun? When do I, back and forth, right? Because there's that, sometimes you have to do that calculus in your head and make the right decision. So, and there isn't always the right decision, but you make the decision that's best in the moment. So no qualms there. Let's jump to another photo I want to ask you a question about here. It's photo on page 37. It features Isaac and Christina preparing to roll out to the next call. There's a couple of things I noticed in this image. I just want to get your take on and see if that was, factored into your decision making to kind of utilize it. Is that, one, obviously you can see yourself in the reflection, and two, you focused on the glass here, keeping the subjects out of focus. Was that all deliberate? Including yourself and keeping the window glass in focus? And if so, why? What was your sort of methodology, or what were you trying to say with this photo?
David, I actually had never noticed that I'm in the reflection of this photo until you just
Oh,
pointed it
okay. Well, there you go.
out. That's amazing. No, that my reflection was unintentional, obviously, and this is one where it's, I wasn't intentionally focusing on the glass. This is one of the ones, I was just kind of shooting and going, and when I got back and looked at it, I don't know, it just kind of struck me as an interesting image of, the subject not being in focus, and the mirroring effect. I don't know. I can't explain why I like this image and why I feel like it gives me an emotional response, but it does. And I think that was kind of the litmus test for a lot of these shots that I included in photos from the front lines. Was when I look at it, does something stir within me? May not be able to identify exactly what it is, but for me, it stirred something, and I think it kind of gives you a sense of how they're feeling, and kind of gives you some, I want to say grounding, but just it kind of brings you into the moment of where these folks are in this time and place.
Okay. Well, let's jump over to page 39. This is, of course, the story that featured that blood trails that you were talking about. And you chose to stop covering this story because of, I guess, the fact that someone had died, right? And I'm just curious there, do you think that perhaps that decision limited you and what you could have shown from this story, or was that trade-off worth it for you? I mean, because, again, you are getting into the very gritty territory of what paramedics actually do. Do you think holding back there may have been the right choice in terms of what you were trying to demonstrate? Because again, you're trying to obviously highlight and promote these, but it's not all rah. Hey, we're paramedics and we do things, and there's nothing. 90%. What their job is dealing with death and injuries and whatnot. And so, do you feel like this was the right decision to kind of hold back, or do you wish you had maybe shown a little bit more of the gruesomeness of it, or do you think no, this is the correct level of tragedy I want to show here?
I think at the time I was, again, being ultra cautious,
Sure, of course.
thinking about privacy and thinking about legal issues and whatnot.
Absolutely.
In retrospect, after having talked to the lawyer and looked at some of these things and having a better understanding of the legal process surrounding stuff like this, I may have tried to get some of those more poignant shots. There was another cardiac arrest that we went on that I also took no images of because, again, there was family present. It was in someone's home. It didn't seem appropriate at the time. This is you got to put yourself in these positions too, man. We're in someone's bedroom, where they spend the night with this person, every night of their life. You have the CPR machine doing the thing. You have the medics talking, and it's a strange, awkward environment to be in ordinarily. To have a photographer, clicking away while this is happening, I just didn't feel right.
Sure, of course.
But to your point, I've seen other photography and stuff from the pandemic and from the field where they are working a cardiac arrest and it is in someone's home, but the angle, maybe they're down on the floor and they're shooting up, so you're just capturing the medic dropping a tube or things like that. There may have been some of those shots that I could have gotten, which may have looked rad and probably could have added to the book and to the story and to the message. But in the practical sense, I didn't feel right, and I didn't think that it would have been appropriate. And it's almost interesting when you see the blood trail and the images stop. It almost leaves the imagination to kind of fill in the blank, which could, I think, be almost more impactful than seeing it for yourself. It's almost like the Alien film where you don't hardly see the creature until the end, and not seeing it and having you imagine, what could be happening or where it is, or, almost builds more suspension and more tension than, the movies where the alien's up in your face and things like that. Yeah. So I think kind of silence can be deafening. So I think almost kind of leaving that space forces people to have to put themselves there and maybe imagine what could have happened or what they may have seen and things like that.
Sure. And there's always something to be said for holding back, right? Again, you can always, bleeds it leads, right? Take the gory route, but again, holding back and being a little bit more restrained has its merits as well. Obviously I noticed throughout there were a few blurry images in your choice of what you chose to publish, and some of those were pretty justifiable, right? You have paramedics rushing into a hospital and you're seeing blurriness as it relates to motion. But you're also seeing a lot of some shots like inside the vehicle, right? And the vehicle is bumping around and it's dark and stuff. So you're seeing blurriness there. Where every shot where you noticed, sort of blurriness, was that in your choice to keep it in the book? Was that deliberate in terms of like, I know this is blurry, but again, it tells a story I want to tell, so I'm going to keep it in there? Or was there any intent or interest maybe to go back and reshoot certain shots? Because a lot of them are very generic in terms of it's a photograph of a console or a photograph of a piece of equipment. You could have easily reshot that shot at a higher shutter speed to get it sharper. So I'm just curious, what was your sort of decision and rationale to use these sort of blurry shots in your book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the explanations is, like I said, I'm not the best photographer in the entire world, so still figuring out optimal camera settings and things like that to this day. Part of it is, like you're saying, it's motion blur. So
Yeah.
someone's whipping up to listen to lungs or doing something like that. It's gonna be a little blurry, and I think
Sure.
that kind of communicates the dynamicness of what this job entails and what these folks are doing when they're on an emergency scene. Um, but yeah, you're exactly right, David. I mean, some of them were, yeah, this is a little blurry, or maybe it's not the best image, but it fits with the story and it helps to
Mhm.
convey an emotion or give you further context into what's happening regarding this vignette or things like that. So
Yeah.
I'm sure people could pick apart, my photography all day long, and there's plenty on display for you to to critique, if someone should so choose to do so.
Right.
But again, I don't claim to be the best. I claim to be someone trying to tell a story. So
Sure. Absolutely.
if it was good enough and it told the story, then the criteria was met in my mind.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I noticed in the beginning of your book, the first, I'd say 50 or so pages are mostly the respond to calls, right? You get the call, you ride with the paramedics to a location, they treat the patient, they drop off the patient, then one of the persons does their um, file the report, and then you show them decompressing. Obviously uh, that's their life, right? That's what you're going to see, but that can become monotonous if it's the same over and over again. What did you do to kind of break up the monotony of shooting the same basic sequence of events over and over again? What were you kind of keeping your mind in terms of trying to find new compositions or new ways to cover the same thing?
I think a lot of it was just what happened in the moment. Yeah, I could have went back and reshot things that could have made it look a little bit better, but it's almost like, um, to me, it takes away from the storyline,
Sure.
because maybe not to someone an outside perspective, but to me and to the people who were there, that's how the console looked at that time. This is how things were. This is how they look. It was more about the documenting of the experience and the moment than it was about finding the best angles or setups or things like that. Um, the Like I said, once the pandemic struck, I was kind of limited as far as what I could do, um, with regards to being in the back of the ambulance and stuff. So I
Right.
think
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
I think that that shift from I think it's good that in the beginning you kind of see the life cycle of what a paramedic's day is and what a call looks like and things like that, so you can kind of get context for the kind of overarching premise of the book. And then once March hits, then I kind of switch to going out with the supervisor, and you get a little bit different angle because it's more of the kind of a little bit more of an outside perspective, because I'm not riding with the crews. We're showing up on the scene with them, so they don't really know me as well. It's not like we have that rapport built up that I have with the folks who I did, a full 12-hour shift or something like that with. So I think that helps to give kind of a different perspective as you're going through the book. And like I said, it gives you a little bit more of that kind of global perspective of everything that's kind of happening throughout the county, and you get to see different crews, different areas, different types of calls, and it helps to kind of keep it a little bit more fresh. But then there's just a lot of these things were specific events, like the George Floyd protest or like the
Right.
appreciation parade or things like that. There were other times when I was out, at the station with my camera and got little stuff here and there that I didn't include because it may have been cool, but it wasn't really relevant to the story.
Yeah.
And so much of this book has just been narrowing the focus and trying to just strip away all the kind of as much of the unnecessary stuff as possible um, to keep the story as coherent as I could, while spanning 500 pages.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's tough to do that when you have such a broad subject of paramedics, right? Because again, there are so many stories you can tell in that subject matter, right? Paramedics do a lot of things, right? So it's like when you're trying to tell the whole story of these are paramedics at this place and time, you kind of almost lose focus of particular individual stories, right? And you do jump around and tell quite a bit of many stories, in your narrative here, obviously jumping in between the paramedics on the street to the leadership and then to the protests. What specifically did you do to protect yourself while covering the protests? And did you have to worry about, perhaps again, people not, for losing you in the crowd, so to speak, and then be like, oh, them, essentially like arresting you, and not knowing who you are, whatnot, or was it always pretty well controlled and you stayed in the right locations and kept yourself safe, or how'd that go?
I'll tell you what, David, that night was probably the most in fear of my life that I've ever been.
Wow.
Um, I've been in some hairy situations. I've been threatened, with weapons and stuff like that, unseen, and things that every paramedic has. I mean, it comes with the
Sure.
job. Any house you walk into, the person could be sitting behind the door with a shotgun in their lap. I mean, that's a reality that needs to be addressed too. So,
Yeah.
um, I was almost expecting a January 6th thing that night where they just go charge, because it was one line of cops versus 75. You couldn't even see the end of the crowd. That's how far
Right.
back down
Of course.
Broadway the crowd was pushed. Um,
Right.
as far as my protection, I had a polo shirt, I had my cargo pants, and I had a ball cap. I had no helmet, no body armor.
No eye pro.
I think
You have your glasses, I
I just might have
guess.
had my glasses on. Although I think I may have had contacts in that night.
Ooh,
So I
contacts
may
with
not have even had
gas,
eye pro. Yeah.
tear gas. That would have been a good mixture.
Um, so yeah, I tried to um, be far enough back behind police lines that I was out of the range of most of the glass bottles and rocks and bricks and um, fireworks, Molotov cocktails. I mean, all this stuff was being thrown behind police lines, and quite a few cops got injured. Several protesters had to be worked on by the medics, and some of the medics got tear gas in their face, and they had, you can see they have body armor, helmet, they have gas masks and things like that. So they had much more protection for an event and an incident like this. And yeah, that was. I was wearing black and blue just like the cops were. And so if they had charged the line, what protection am I going to be afforded with the polo shirt that says, ambulance on it? Like, is that going to
Yeah.
protect me? I don't know. So,
No, they'll be like, you're with them. We're
yeah,
gonna
and
take you
that's
down
right.
too.
And that was also kind of the reason why I made the book, because it's like, you're throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at these medics who are back here trying to keep you safe, trying to keep these cops safe. They just worked a 12-hour shift on the street, and now they're coming here to have to deal with this. And do you realize that? I don't know if people maybe think about the
Right.
consequences of things like that
Sure.
when they're caught up in the moment. And I see both sides of the story, man. I don't like to see black folks getting killed, and I don't like to see cops getting killed. But I don't
Sure.
think that is the best way to address that issue, by perpetrating violence on first responders who, it didn't even happen in Oakland. Why
Right.
why are you so mad at these cops? A lot of and most of the
Yeah.
police force in Oakland is very diverse. I mean, there's so many black cops and brown women cops, and so many. Like, these are the folks that you're pissed off at. Like, these are actually the folks who are trying to change things from the inside. And so
Yeah.
it turns into a mob mentality at that point. When you have 7,500 people, it's no longer, in my opinion, it turns into a mob as opposed to a protest, because
Yeah.
it spiraled out of control quickly. And there's obviously talk of agitators and things like that, people coming in from out of town just to specifically cause trouble and break shit and
Sure. Sure.
stuff like that. So um, it was confusing and it was crazy, and I had no protection, but I wanted to be there to document this because on that day, we didn't know how many people are going to show up or how bad it was going to be, or anything like that, but you could just feel this weight in the city.
Yeah.
It was heavy, just the air. It was like, man, it just feels like it's going to be a crazy night. And it turned out that it was. I happened to be there with my camera, got some what I think are pretty crazy shots, and wanted to get that stuff out there.
Yeah. Showed off some of those shots. It was definitely looks like a fun night. Of course, I'm being facetious there, but I'm glad you made it out safe and sound. Obviously, a lot of folks I've known who've been working the protest scene for a long time were not as lucky. And, I've known many great folks who got, injured very seriously covering those types of things. So you got to be careful. You got to stay safe. At least if anything had happened to you, you were near the paramedics. So they probably would have been able to, like, we'll help out this Hanley guy. He's been doing some good pictures of us. We'll give him a hand. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely good that you keep yourself safe out there to the degree that you're able, while still capturing some pretty vivid imagery. So you got a lot of varied imagery here, a lot of varied aspects to the story. What's your sort of favorite image or favorite moment from this book? Do you have a favorite one? Can you pick your favorite? Is that possible?
I don't
Or are
think
they
it's
all like
possible
your
with
children?
500 image. Yeah, they all kind of like my children,
Is
and
there any particular most impactful image in the book or story that you're like, oh man, this one sticks with me the most?
the one that I told you about, the gunshot and the wife screaming out, was the one that's probably going to haunt me the most. But one
Yeah.
of the more heartwarming ones that's in the book. It's not flashy. It's not anything super crazy. But there was one of the paramedics who's been there 20, 30 years, named Ray. His son Jay started his first shift as a 911 EMT, working a night shift in Oakland with his dad, who has been working in the county for 20 years. So his dad was there to pin his badge on, and I was there to capture him, showing him how to check out an ambulance and how to do all the pre-flight checks and everything. And to me, it warmed my heart, and that's why it sticks out for me. There's so much horror and so much sadness and things that these folks have to deal with, and that maybe you see in the book, that you can almost forget that these folks are human. And this is a real humanizing sequence, and a couple of shots that are in there, not flashy, but it shows the passing of the torch. And that a lot of that happens in first responder and military too. So many folks who are in the military have family members who pass the torch on to them. And it was nice to see almost like the next generation upcoming, and some hope that there's still folks that choose to go through all this training, put on their boots, put on their uniform, and go out in the streets to go help people.
Definitely, definitely. All right, great. Well, as we wrap up this interview, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
Sure. I think one of the things is, one of the takeaways is, what can folks do to further support medics or honor them. One of the things that I try to start off is thank medics for their service. If you see a paramedic walking down the street or getting lunch, hey man, thanks for your service. We appreciate what you do. Just on the local level, in your own personal ambulance crews in your area, that's something you can do to start showing honor, which is much overdue for these folks. And then also think about, EMS is not considered an essential service in most municipalities, if you can believe that, which is why private ambulance companies, come in to take over the 911 contracts and things like that. So I'm not sure if that's the best way to run emergency medical services. It seems like, when money gets tight, the patients or the providers are the ones who end up having to pay the price. So if, your municipality is considering, maybe raising some tax money to actually legitimize your EMS agency, or pay them, proper wages and, pensions and things like that, that police and firefighters have ingrained in their career field. I don't like paying exorbitant taxes, but you get what you pay for when it comes to emergency services. So
Right.
Voting on things like that, talking to your city council about, what they can do to further support things like that. That's what I'm hoping voters from the front lines will do, is start this conversation of how can we start to take better care of these folks and honor them.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, tell people where they can find and buy your book.
Absolutely. You can go to dope.net. That's DOHP.net. You can throw on a /books. It'll take you right to the landing page. Or my book is available on Amazon.
Nice. That's great. Okay, well, everybody go check that out. Those links will be in the show notes. So if you're looking for those, you can go check that out. That's DOHP.net. The other kind of dope. But thank you so much, Derek, for taking time out to talk to us today. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing any future products and books that you create in the future. Obviously, you've got a sense for style and a sense for an eye for interesting subject matter. So we hope to have you on the show again when you talk about your next book.
Awesome, David. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And like I said, I love hearing your feedback and what you've had to say. Your perspective is very valuable to me with your long career field in this industry. So it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I'd love to speak to you again.
All right, Derek. Great. Have a great night. Have a
Thank
good
you for
one.
your service,
Bye-bye.
sir.
Thank you for your service.
Hoorah.
Bye-bye.